So you're thinking about making a move up here to the Boise, Idaho area, and you're already sold on all of the great things that this area has to offer. You love the lifestyle that you could get, and you kind of know why everybody is flocking to Idaho still today. But after hearing all of that, the most important thing that you need to know is if it works for you and your family, and your standard of living is one of the most important parts of all of that. So today we're gonna break down exactly what it costs to live here in the Boise, Idaho area today so that you can make the best call for you and your family. Stay tuned. What's up guys? Welcome back to the channel. I'm Chase Dolan, your Boise realtor. And like I said, today we are gonna talk all things cost of living here in the Boise, Idaho area. We're gonna break down what the housing costs are here on the buy side, but also on the rental side. We're gonna break down your everyday expenses from your utilities, your gas. We're gonna talk about the groceries, what you should expect to spend on food. We're also gonna spend a good chunk of time talking about the taxes and your overall tax burden here in Idaho and how that might compare with some of the other states. And finally, we're gonna break down one of the biggest criteria for you when you're looking to move anywhere, but especially up here to Idaho. We're gonna break down all things wages here in Idaho, where they're currently at, where they expect to go, and how when you look at it in a relative fashion, again, that standard of living, you could take a solid pay cut and still have a much higher standard of living here because we are so much cheaper in some of the costs. But we'll dive more into that towards the end of the video. And before we fully dive in, I just want to give you the reminder that I am a local agent up here in the area. So if you're looking at all of this today, you have more questions, or you want a much more specific breakdown on your situation, the area that you're looking for, just reach out. All of my information is down below. I absolutely love chatting through exactly that. But let's get started with what the overall cost of living here is in Boise and how it compares to the other states around, because as you guys know, I am a big proponent of really looking at everything in a relative fashion. If you just look at the cost of living of Boise, that doesn't really tell you much. You could compare it to Boise last year, but that doesn't tell you if it's a good place to live or not. We have to compare it with where you're coming from, the other cities that you might be comparing to. We're gonna give you some tools for exactly that. When looking at the overall cost of living on a national scale, Boise is gonna be 4% higher than the national average right now. When you drill down more specifically into the housing costs, Boise is gonna be a little bit higher at 7% higher than the national average. And this is where we've seen a big change over the last decade. But on the flip side, when we're looking at the utilities, Boise is actually gonna be close to 17% lower than the national average. This really is gonna be one of those spots that we truly excel at, and it's how we can start to separate ourselves and give you that better quality of life. And then when you break it down by all of the other categories that you can compare a city to the national average, for the most part, Boise is going to flirt right around that national average line, a couple percentage points higher, a couple percentage points lower for most of them. All of the numbers that I just talked about, you can find on payscale.com, which is a site that I use a lot for this kind of stuff. According to the most recent Consumer Affairs study, they break down and compare the 100 largest cities in the United States and where they kind of rank in all of these different categories. But a big one is the affordability and the cost of living. And in the most recent one, they ranked Boise as the 9th most affordable place to live in the country out of these large cities. But the really cool thing is this is comparing everything across the country. If you want to live west of the Rocky Mountains, which is just a different kind of lifestyle, Boise's going to be right at the top. A lot of the cities out here on the West Coast, they're just more expensive because they have some things that people are willing to pay for. And that is one of the hidden reasons that I try and tell people is Boise truly is one of those last affordable places that is in this portion of the country. To get started with some very specific costs that you need to be ready for, we're gonna start with probably the biggest of them all. We're gonna talk about housing. And yes, I am a real estate agent, so my whole world is housing, buying and selling homes. But when you're looking at where you're gonna live, one of the things that you know you're gonna have is a roof over your head. Doesn't matter if you own it or if you rent it. So let's talk about the costs on both sides. Right now, according to rentcafe.com, the average rent that you should be expecting is right around $1,650 for, again, that average rental. And shifting over to the buy side, owning your home, the median house price that you're gonna find in the Boise, Idaho area is gonna be just around $475,000, which is gonna be a little bit higher than the US kind of median home price, which right now sits just around $436,000. Now, one of the very interesting things about our valley right now is that this median home price is gonna be drastically different depending on where you want to live. If you want to live in the most prestigious parts of town, the north end, up in the foothills, close to downtown, your home price is going to be a little bit higher. Maybe you want to live over in Eagle next to the river, same situation. But what if you really like Kuna, you like Nampa, you're okay being on the outskirts a little bit more? Your home price is going to be much lower. So this is one of those things that you really have to drill into the areas that you're most interested in, and then you can really start to see, okay, a median home price there is going to be this compared to this. And on the lower end of those prices, for those entry-level homes, I typically break it into two segments. There's going to be Ada County and there's going to be Canyon County. Those are the two biggest counties here in the Boise Metro area. And when I'm talking to buyers who are looking for that first home, if we're shopping in Ada County, which is going to be Boise, Meridian, Eagle, Kuna, you're really going to want to have a budget closer to that $400,000 range, and that'll give you some really good options to compare with. You're going to see all of the entry level kind of classic starter floor plan, 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms. You're going to have a small yard, but you're going to be able to compare new construction with some resales. You're going to be able to choose the neighborhood that you like. Whereas as you get down closer to the 300,000s, you're going to be pretty limited and you're just going to have to kind of take what is out there for you. Now, shifting over to Canyon County, which is going to be Nampa, Middleton, Caldwell, you're definitely going to have a little bit more bang for your buck out there. But to have that same kind of power to compare homes, actually choose one that you want and have some choices, you're going to want your budget to start right around that $350,000 range. We all know though that the mortgage or your rent is just the start of your overall kind of housing costs. Let's break down a little bit of what the utilities are going to look like. These are going to change very, very, very much depending on which part of town you're living in, specifically your water, your sewer, and your trash. Meridian, for example, bundles them all together in one payment to the city. And last time I checked, it was around $40 a month. Whereas out in Eagle, where we live now, our water, sewer, and trash are billed separately. And total, it comes out closer to that $70 to $75 a month. So again, when you decide on the area that you want to look at, we'll dive more into, okay, what does it actually look like utility bill wise out here? Because I hate that I have to say this, but all of these numbers that I'm talking about, they are estimates and they can change wildly by the time you watch this video. So do your own research. The other two utilities that you have to have is you're going to have your electric or power bill. Basically, everybody here is going to be under Idaho Power. And then you're going to have your natural gas, which the majority of people here are going to be under Intermountain Gas. When you combine these two, I typically look at them as a whole because in the summer months, when your AC is cranking, your electric bill is going to be a lot higher, but your natural gas bill is going to be a little bit lower. Flip that into the winter months when your AC is off, but the furnace is what's kicking in. That's going to be higher on the gas side, lower on the electric side. The average energy utility, so these two for somebody who lives in our area, is just around $150 a month, which is exactly what I've seen. And I've lived in Boise, Meridian, Eagle. All of them have kind of been right around that range. Keeping with the idea of those everyday expenses that you're going to have to plan for, if you're owning your home here, there's a couple more that you just have to know that you might be familiar with where you're coming from, but you also might not be. One of these being most of our neighborhoods here are all on pressurized irrigation for your landscaping. Basically what this means is there's a public kind of irrigation canal. You have access to some of that water and you can water your lawn, your shrubs and such with this water instead of hooking it up to your city water, which is a lot more expensive. This does only run for a certain time during the year, and once the irrigation canals dry up, the irrigation water's gone. But typically you're gonna have access to that water from around end of March, beginning of April, through kind of that middle of September, depending on what the climate looks like that year. Cost for this is gonna range depending on which irrigation district you're gonna be in. But on the whole, I would estimate somewhere between around $70, $75, and $100 every single year. You just pay it once. This is also something that is included in a lot of the HOA fees around town. So again, do your own research. Those HOA fees are another thing that you have to consider. Depending on the neighborhood that you choose, a lot of our communities up here do have HOAs in place. This is not the video to convince you if an HOA is good, if you need to avoid one. There are pros and cons to it. But right now with the growth and the emphasis that's been put on master plan communities out here, HOAs are extremely common. The specific cost will vary a lot based off the level of amenities that you have. So if you're in a neighborhood that has a couple of pools, you have green spaces, you have parks, you have trash that needs to be emptied. Maybe you're in Spurwing where you have the whole country club, you're gonna have the golf course. those are gonna be a little bit higher. On the high end, your HOA dues here, you're gonna be around $2,000 a year, which is just under 200 bucks a month. Now, let's say that you're in a neighborhood that doesn't have the extensive amenities. Maybe you have one small community pool, you have a couple of green spaces, you have some things, but the HOA is really there to make it all look pretty, clear the roads, get that plowing done. You're gonna be looking at closer to that $500 to $700 a year. Think about 50 bucks a month. And then on the absolute low end of the brand new communities, those entry-level starter communities that don't really have a lot of the amenities to offer, you're still most likely gonna have an HOA, but in these, you really should only be paying a few $100s a year. And again, I'm not gonna sit here and tell you whether or not you should be in an HOA. That is a separate video, but it's a cost that you have to keep in mind because this is one of the only costs that isn't included in your mortgage payment. Irrigation and HOA, you typically have to pay yourself directly. Let's shift into the biggest everyday expense that I think most of us have, but it's something that kind of runs my life. Let's talk about food and groceries. On the whole, here in Idaho, according to the most recent census, the average weekly spend on groceries, so you're cooking your food at home here in Idaho, is just around $257. So times that by 4, you're looking at about $1,000 a month. Compare that to the US average for weekly spend on groceries, that's gonna be closer to 270 bucks a week. So you're gonna win a little bit being in our area in this regard. A few of the staples that I really wanted to highlight, I went to 2 of our most popular grocery chains, Fred Meyer, which is kind of our big Kroger setup, and then Winco. These are the 2 grocery stores I use the most. Starting with bread, if you're looking for just a standard loaf of bread, if you're over in Winco, it's gonna be around $2 per loaf, with some really solid options on that basic whiter wheat bread being down closer to that $1.10. Now, if you run over to Fred Meyer, you're still gonna have access to a ton of loaves of bread around that $2 to $2.50 range, but the majority of them are gonna be closer to that $3, $3.50 range. What about a dozen eggs? In Fred Meyer, you're gonna be able to get a dozen cage-free eggs for just around $3.29. And then over at Winco, you can get the same dozen of eggs for closer to around $3.50. A gallon of milk over at Winco is gonna run you around $3.04 is what it was listed at when I was there, but just around $3. And then at Fred Meyer, the same gallon of milk is gonna cost you around $3.20. Now, I don't compare these to tell you which one you should shop at. There are things that we go to Fred Meyer for, but there's also gonna be a lot of things that we go to Winco for. My main tip on this, Fred Meyer's gonna have everything that you're looking for. They're gonna have the specific brands. It's a very steady supply. It's Kroger, it's a large company. Winco is the place that you wanna go if you just need those staples. They're gonna be a little bit cheaper, but every once in a while, if you want a very specific brand of bread, Winco's just not gonna have it on a consistent basis the way Fred Meyer is. So if you're more flexible, go to Winco, you might save some money. But if you're very picky and you need something very particular, you might wanna try Fred Meyer. But again, give Winco the shot. Another couple of items that I think are easy to compare from state to state is we're gonna look at a couple of eating out things. We're gonna look at McDonald's and the Big Mac. The Big Mac Index is one of the best ways to compare cost of living and inflation differences between states because guess what? Everyone has a plethora of McDonald's, so it gives you a nice benchmark. Here right now in the Boise area, a Big Mac just for the sandwich is gonna run you right at $4.99. And on the same thread, because it is fall, we are just at the beginning of September as I'm filming this. It's that time of year, and a grande pumpkin spice latte at Starbucks is gonna run you just about $6.25 here in the area. So take these 2 numbers, compare them to what it is in your local market, and that is a really good way to see, okay, is Boise gonna be drastically more expensive or less? And then you can kind of roll from there. A couple more everyday expenses that I get questions about a lot is right now a gallon of gas on the whole around our area is gonna be just around $3.50 a gallon. And then let's say that you wanna hit a movie on the weekend. These are not the matinee shows. You're gonna wanna expect to pay somewhere around that $10, maybe $12 per ticket, with the matinees being a little bit closer to that 7 to 8. Some of them have some great specials. As I'm throwing all of this information at you, I know that comparing it and really getting the specific numbers for you and your family is tough to do. I want you to spend some time looking at some of those cost of living calculators. You type that into Google, you're gonna find a ton, but the ones I've had clients really have good success using are going to be payscale.com. Forbes has a good one. Rent Cafe has a good one, but these are just the starting point. Take a look, figure out which one kind of matches what your best experience is. But for the most part on all of them, you can put where you're moving from, what your current job is, where you're moving to, what kind of job are you looking for, and it'll break down, hey, if you make 50 grand in the city that you're in Boise for the same standard of living, you need to make 65, you need to make 25. That's where you can really look at and say, okay, if I can make that, our standard of living is gonna be neutral. But let's hop into the next big portion of your cost of living. We're gonna talk about everybody's favorite topic. Let's talk about taxes. Nowadays, there seems to be a tax for everything. So we're gonna focus a lot on tax burden. I'm gonna mention a few of the other big tax rates that you need to know, but I want you to look at for your state, your city, what is your overall tax burden as a percentage of your income? And then you can compare that up to here, because that's really the number that we want to know. The Idaho Tax Commission does an annual study on kind of the impact of taxes for everyone that lives in our state. What they found last year is that Idaho is the 35th highest tax burden in the entire country when you look at it as a percentage of your income. Now, if you change the criteria to just the overall taxes paid per person, we drop down to 43rd, so we're even more affordable. But that difference there, that is gonna highlight one of the things that when we talk about it here in a second, you gotta come back to. A big portion of that is because our wages just aren't as competitive. But again, if you sparse this out by all of the states that are west of the Rocky Mountains, Idaho is actually gonna be the second lowest tax burden as a percentage of your income. So again, when we're looking at the quality of life you can get out here, you're not gonna find many places that are more affordable than Idaho. Some of the big taxes that you need to be prepared for is Idaho has just a flat income tax of 5.8%. This is for individuals and it's for corporations. On all the goods and services that you buy, Idaho does have a 6% state sales tax. And then the big one is gonna be your property tax. So if you decide to buy your home, you have to pay taxes on that to the state. On average, right now, a homeowner in the state of Idaho is paying just around 0.5% of their home's assessed value in property tax. I wanna say that again, 0.5%. When I have people reach out and they're looking here, they're coming from places like Texas, where your taxes on your property are drastically higher. And this is a number that surprises so many of you. This is gonna be one of those numbers that depending on where you're at in our area, different cities, different counties, your tax burden for the property is gonna be different. Meridian and Eagle, for example, are right around that 0.5% or a little lower. Boise's gonna be around 0.7%. And then Nampa, surprisingly, every single time, is gonna be the highest, closer to that 1.5 to 2%. So when you're thinking about the house that you want to buy, especially if you're getting a loan, because this is gonna be a part of your mortgage payment, you gotta know what the taxes are gonna be for each property that you're looking at. And I do wanna clarify that 0.5% average, that is for owner occupied homes. And the reason for that is here in Idaho, if you live in your home, your primary residence, you actually get what's called a homestead homeowner's exemption, which in basic terms takes $125,000 of your assessed value and makes that tax-free. So you only get taxed on assessed value minus $125,000. Even with all of those numbers, taxes are one of those things that can be so complicated. Just a reminder, consult with a CPA, someone who is a professional in this field, to really look at every single tax and figure out what the best situation is for you. Whew. Now that we've talked about a lot of the costs that are going to be coming out of your pocket and going to living up here in the area, let's talk about the big one. Let's talk about wages and the income you should expect. Right now, across everyone, every profession, the median household income in our area is just around $68,000. According to workstream.com, which is where I got a lot of the numbers that I'm about to go through, our minimum wage up here in Idaho is still $7.25. It mirrors that federal national minimum. It is crazy to think that we've grown so much and our wages haven't gone up at all. And we haven't had a minimum wage increase since 2009. So we're looking at about 15 years now. Take from this what you will, but I always think it's helpful to know kind of the history of the government of where you're going and what they plan on doing, because you want to be able to forecast a little bit out. As of filming this video, the state legislature is working on a bill that would increase the state minimum wage up to $10 in 2025. But as you can see with that 15-year gap, there is no guarantee. So plan on, if you're going to be working in somewhere that is that minimum wage, $7.25. Now, the good news is you really shouldn't have to work minimum wage. A lot of the jobs here now are starting to creep up, even if that standard doesn't. Across all professions right now here in Idaho, the average wage is gonna be $21.72. Breaking this down into a couple specific areas, if you're working in that food service or prep, you're gonna be looking at an average wage of around $12.43 an hour. And then for another big one that I have people moving here all the time is in the healthcare support field. You're gonna be looking at an average of around $16.61 per hour. The good news is, as of right now, the living wage in Idaho, which means you have enough income to cover all of your basic needs, but nothing else. We're talking housing, food, transportation, that's about it, no fluff, is gonna be right around $11.75. So most of these average wages are gonna be above that, but not by a lot. And as much as I hype up Boise and living here in the area because there are so many good things, this is our main con. If you're moving from somewhere that just has the higher wages, if you're coming from Southern California, maybe you're a nurse, there's a good chance that you come up here, you interview with the hospital systems around, and you realize that you're gonna be taking a 20-30% pay cut, which even if we kind of compare it with the cost of living difference and your standard of living might be staying the same or going up, that's just a huge hit to your ego and what you think you're worth. So I always like to get in front of it a little bit that you should anticipate your wage going down a bit, but don't be surprised. And it's also no worries if you see this and that is the determining factor and you're like, you know what, until Idaho gets their wages figured out, it's not the place for me. I am a staunch believer that as we continue to grow, our economy is going to follow, and at some point wages have to follow as well. And there are some signs of hope here. Across the entire state, last year, we saw wages grow by 8%. Here in Boise itself, we saw wages grow by closer to 10%. So there are some reasons to be hopeful and think positively. But again, we're making that decision today, so you can only put so much emphasis on the future. And there you have it. I know that that was a lot, so thank you for sticking with me. I can feel myself getting a little bit warm from this light hitting me, but I'm glad that you stayed tuned. I hope that it was helpful. Again, if you have any specific questions, you want a full breakdown of what it would actually look like to live in a certain area, just reach out. All of my information is down below. I run clients through that scenario all the time. It is a big thing. And if you learned something, you found this helpful, or you just enjoyed the video, hit that subscribe button down below. That way you are the first to know everything you need to know about living here in the Boise area. But until then, watch one of these videos that's popping up, and I'll see you guys on the next one.